Let me ask you a question about the inner workings of the Democratic Party. Can you explain to us the role of identity in democratic politics?
Well, let's just say I would love for identity to play a less central role in the politics of our country and the politics of my party. And not just because I might have been passed over for an opportunity, but just because I think it has really dominated so many people's thinking in a way that makes it harder for us to build a message across identities. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think it makes sense to pretend that identity doesn't matter. I don't think it makes sense to pretend to be colorblind. I also don't think it makes sense to allow that to explain everything, which is one of the habits that's formed, I think, definitely on my party's far left, that made it harder for us to get through, especially when you have a lot of people whose interests are shared. I'm thinking about the economic interest of poor people and low wealth people in this country, for example, who are Black, white, and of every ethnicity and identity and gender, of course, who maybe didn't hear a unifying message that was speaking to them as a group, because it felt like my party it was like a salad bar. Like, here's something for your group, and here's something for another group, and here's something for another group. And it just didn't add up into a story.
Do you think that there was censorship under the Biden administration for things like scientific truth? Let's just focus on COVID for a second and the backdoors that it seemed that the Biden administration had to places like Facebook and places like Twitter to just suppress scientific thought and debate, as you just talked about.
So this is an amazing example of some of the false equivalencies that I've seen thrown around out there. So yeah, I would acknowledge, I think a lot of folks would say that, it came really close to the stove some of the times when the administration was trying to make sure that, bad information or misinformation wasn't being pushed into the kind of public health conversation, and was engaging social media companies that were trying to, be responsible and do the right thing. And there might be moments that they got that wrong or went too far. But right now we're in a moment, right, where the president of the United States doesn't like being criticized by a comedian.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So we got to talk about this fascinating episode of the All In podcast featuring Pete Buttigieg, a.k.a. Pete Booty Man, who some believe can run for president of the United States in 2028, right? That he might run, even though in most polls featuring Pete Buttigieg, he gets no support from Black people. I'm talking about like 0%, right? Like, I'm very, very serious. Like, Black voters just will not support Pete Buttigieg for whatever reason. And you guys can come up with your own conclusion in regards to why that is, right? I personally have a strong clue in regards to why Black voters won't support Pete Buttigieg. But hey, he is one of these contenders who could be the Democrat Party nominee. We're going to see. However, in this episode, Chamath is going to set Pete Buttigieg straight on President Trump's immigration policies being, quote unquote, dangerous to immigrants like himself, right? He is somebody who immigrated to the United States of America, and he's going to push back against Pete Buttigieg going on a Trump deranged rant, boohoo, whine, and crying racism over President Trump's policies. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this.
Pete, do you think that Donald Trump made the right decision to close the border? And if not, why not?
I think that he is right to draw attention to the problem of the border, and that it is important to have a secure border. I don't believe it was true that it was exactly open before. I think it is.
Wow. Again, this is what really annoys me about Democrats. He was asked directly about whether or not he believed that President Trump did the right thing to close the border. First and foremost, Pete Buttigieg didn't answer the question, right? So what does that tell you? What does that tell you? Again, Democrats are going to pretend as if they're tough on the border, right? They're going to pretend as if they believe in closed borders, right? That they believe in not allowing millions of illegal immigrants in the country. This is what they're going to pretend in 2028. They're going to pretend that that's what they believe during the midterms. But when asked directly about, hey, did President Trump do the right thing when he closed the border, he doesn't answer the question. And then on top of that, he gaslights and claims that, well, in the last administration, I wouldn't say that the border was open, right? I wouldn't characterize it that way. Well, how would you characterize 11 million plus illegal immigrants coming through the southern border, right, during the Biden administration? How would you characterize that if you wouldn't say that it's open, right? That's not an open border, right? I think that is an open border when you allow a record number of illegals in the country. I mean, effectively, the border is open. So it's stuff like this that annoys me about Democrats like Pete Buttigieg, because he's a smooth talker, right? And that's why he is one of these people that a lot of people are speculating that, hey, he could be a contender because of the fact that he's a decent propagandist in regards to how he strings his words together, but he's not really answering the question. And that really is what annoys me about these Democrats, right? It's always these word games instead of just answering the question directly, is yes or no. Do you believe that President Trump closing the border was the right thing to do? Yes or no question doesn't answer it.
It's functionally closed now. But I would agree that the last administration didn't do enough and didn't do enough early enough on the border.
You're saying?
Yeah.
And why do you think Biden looked the other way?
Yeah, what was the strategy? Was there a strategy?
Yeah, I think what happened was he was really looking to Congress to do it. He came out of Congress. He was a creature of Congress and thought, Congress can forge a bipartisan, since, there's actually a bipartisan agreement among the American people on what to do, right? Which is what most people believe, what I believe, which is let's make it harder to come in illegally and easier to come in legally and to get legal if you're not. I mean, that's where...
Which means a lot of different things, right? Again, that's why you can't believe these Democrats when it comes to their platitudes and, generalized statements, right? They say, well, see, we believe in making it harder to come into the country illegally and making it easier for people to be here legally, right? This is what they claim, okay? But what does that actually really mean? Well, Democrats under the Biden administration, what that meant is that, well, we're going to parole a bunch of people into the country who otherwise would be here illegally, but we're going to classify them as legal because we're going to essentially allow anybody that comes to the border and says, yo tengo hambre, right? Yo tengo sed, right? They're automatically going to be classified as asylum seekers, right? And we're going to allow them to seek asylum in this country, to wait for their cases to be heard in this country and basically just parole them all in as legal immigrants, right? I mean, we all remember Joe Biden waving his magic wand, right, for the Haitians who came to the border, who tried to come into the country illegally, and he was like, all of a sudden they're protected, right? And they can just come right on in because the president says that they're protected. Yeah, that's what Democrats were doing, okay? And that's why you can't believe these people when they come out here and they say stuff like this, because he's not really saying anything. He's not really telling you what he really believes. This is why he can't answer the very simple question of, did Trump do the right thing by closing the border? Because they don't actually believe in closing the border. They don't believe in that, okay? If they believed in that, then Biden would have done that. This guy says, well, Biden didn't do it because he believed in getting things done through Congress. And it's like, no, he didn't. He believed in executive action for things that he felt that Democrats needed to take executive action on, right? On Democrat priorities, Biden had no issues taking executive action. Or things that Democrats didn't want to do, right? Like, for example, close the border. He decided, well, you know what? I'm not going to use my executive power. Congress needs to do something, right? You remember that? Oh, they need to pass that bill that doesn't actually close the border. Y'all remember that? The bipartisan border bill? They need to pass that in order to close the border. Turns out that was a lie. Because President Trump, on the first day in office, literally closed the border, right? He used the military and he closed the border.
Most people are.
That's about
where most of
80% of the country.
Yeah, and that's where most of the space for compromise has been on the Hill. And yet, I think it was the 80s the last time we had an actual bill to fix it. So I think and this is speculating. I mean, I never really, was in the middle of the immigration side of things. But I think he felt like the way to do this was to get things done in Congress. He felt that, he'd managed to get the infrastructure bill done, IRA. But what's interesting is when he finally gave up on Congress, when it was clear that we just weren't going to get very far. And meanwhile, you had that set of executive orders that came late in the term. That had a major effect on the number of illegal crossings. So you got to ask yourself, if that executive order that happened toward the end, if that had been done in year 1, year 2, would we be in a different place? Now, of course, we're on the other extreme.
The question is, why wasn't it done in year 1, year 2, right? When it became clear that there was not going to be any legislation passed in Congress, why was it only done right before the election? That is what you have to ask yourself. Well, because of political reasons. Because Democrats, again, didn't really believe in closing the border. They only did it because they felt like it would help them win the election. Again, this is the type of games that Democrats like to play.
We got citizens who just have an accent or look brown, getting picked up, sometimes getting detained without access to a lawyer for a frighteningly long amount of time. And that's citizens, let alone other people who, maybe they shouldn't be here, but they also shouldn't be brutalized, right? And I think one reason you see the pendulum swinging on this is we're seeing just how extreme it's gotten at a time when, again, I think the only way forward really is a kind of a grand bargain where we bring together the people who believe in these simple realities, that we've got an economy and a society that exerts a pull that actually needs more people, like for our demographics and our economy to work, then there is room in the kind of legal pipeline to come in.
Just to clean this up, Pete, like if it were up to you, would you reopen the border, or would you maintain the Donald Trump position right now of, okay, now it's closed, now let's figure out this grand bargain, as you say. Keep
Let's
it
be a little more
closed.
precise by what we mean. I mean, if you mean like having it be difficult, at least as difficult as it is now to cross illegally, I think it's a good thing for it to be difficult to cross illegally. But again,
notice how he can't answer the question directly. It's a yes or no. Would you maintain President Trump's policies? Yes or no? He can't give you an answer because he's not going to do it, right? He doesn't believe in it. Don't fall for this nonsense from these Democrats. Again, this guy, Democrats try to promote him, liberals try to promote him as this master wordsmith, right? He's so educated and articulate. And it's like, no. Listen to what he's actually saying. He's not saying anything. He's not telling you anything. He's saying a lot. It sounds like he's saying a lot, but he's not saying anything. Answer the question. He says, well, making it harder to come in to country illegally is a good thing, right? But that's not the question that he asked. He asked, are you going to maintain President Trump's policies? The answer to that question is no, right? That's why he can't answer it directly.
I think calling it open then or close now, you're talking about a lot of different overlapping things. Obviously, there are a lot of things about Trump's immigration policy I think are wrong, destructive,
we can go to the
possibly
second piece
illegal.
too. I mean, if everybody has consensus that the border should be closed and it should be orderly and legal, great. It's 80% of the country. And then the majority of the country doesn't like what we're seeing with ICE agents without badges, wearing masks. That's the majority of the country is uncomfortable with this. A large percentage of the moderates who voted for Trump, at least this is what the surveys are saying, people are not comfortable with this. So I'm curious about what you think the motivation is. And you can go into conspiracy corner if you want. It's allowed here on this program. We can speculate. But the conspiracy corner for Biden was he wanted to let a lot more people in order to build the Democratic base, in order to get voters. Okay, that's one theory. Now the theory here is Trump is doing these violent deportations, tackling people, spending a lot of money while doing it. Why? Why is Trump doing it this way? Why does Pete think he's doing it this way?
I think he thrives on a politics of fear. I think chaos is good for him. I think he thrives on chaos. I think when you see images of people getting beaten up, or what he used to call American carnage, like anything that validates that, basically the worse it's a weird thing, but the worse it feels to be in this country, the better off Donald Trump is, whether he's running for president or whether he is president. And sending troops marching into the streets.
Can I just say, as the only immigrant right now on this podcast who immigrated here legally, I feel much safer and better under a Donald Trump presidency than I ever did under a Biden presidency. Just want you to hear it from my mouth for what that's worth.
Do you feel safer about the fact that a Latino doctor crossing the street in Washington, D.C. Is getting hassled or harassed because they're brown?
I don't think that I've heard that. Now,
okay, so you're not aware of any case in which a U.S. citizen who is
no,
like
but I will tell you, for example, after 9/11.
Wait, you're on a podcast commenting about immigration. Surely you have some level of awareness.
Let me tell you. After 9/11, for example, for years I had SSS on my boarding passes. I was pulled over constantly, and people probably thought that I was a Muslim hijacker. Mm-hmm. So I know what it feels like to be harassed, and what I'm telling you categorically is I feel safer in this presidency than I have ever felt. And I'm just letting you know that. It's just my lived experience.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm
think
glad
we're
you feel
all
safer.
well
I'm worried about how most Americans feel.
Well, I mean, I think we're all aware that people are being picked up and they're being racially profiled.
Oh, that's not true. And I love the fact that race card from Pete Buttigieg got rejected, right? Because in this same podcast, Pete Buttigieg talked about how the Democrats need to get away from identity politics, even though, I mean, Pete Buttigieg's whole political career is based off his identity being a gay man. He claims that, hey, Democrats, they lead into identity politics too much, but this is exactly what we're talking about in regards to the problems of the Democrat Party. Pete Buttigieg is basically trying to say that if you are a so-called black or brown person in this country, you should be afraid, or you should be fearful of President Trump's policies because of the fact that you might get harassed by ICE, okay, based off your skin color, your race, and that's just not true, right? Just because you're black or brown, that doesn't mean that you should be living in fear. In fact, I believe that most so-called black and brown people in this country are not actively living in fear that ICE is going to try to harass them on the street and to deport them, right? Nobody, in my opinion, is living in fear like that. I mean, the average person. I think most people who are in fear, okay, of what's happening are people who are in the country illegally, right? Who shouldn't be here, okay? But if you're here legally, if your paperwork is straight, regardless of your skin color, your race, you don't really have much to worry about, to be honest with you.
And their Fourth Amendment rights are being suspended here. And
let me put it a different way. Has it crossed your mind that if right now they started by going for people who are illegal, and then they've started roughing up people who are citizens but who are speaking up against the administration, that even if you feel safe now, in a country where that sort of thing can be done, where people can, where even comedians could lose their jobs for criticizing the government, does any part of you wonder if that might ever come for you?
Pete, it did come for me. Here's what I'm trying to tell you. After the Patriot Act passed after 9/11, I had to come to terms with the fact that even as a legal immigrant into the United States, that I was going to get extra searches, I was going to get stopped, and it happened for 6 years. I came to terms with it. I put my head down and I kept working.
But that didn't mean it was okay, right?
It was a law that was passed, and people felt, for whatever reason, that there was an amount of racial profiling that could happen then. And what I'm telling you is every immigrant class at some point has felt this. My point is, it made things safer in the aggregate. And what I'm telling you now is what is happening now makes cities safer. It makes places safer. If you go to Washington, D.C., it is the safest it's ever been. And you hear this consistently from many, many brown and black people.
I guess what I'm telling you is if you take the amount of money that it costs to do a full-scale military deployment in an American city, and you just used it on, improving funding for the police and mental health and a whole lot of other things, you probably get a pretty good result that way too. But I know there are a lot of people, and I have heard, personal direct examples of people who are in some cases U.S. citizens or in other cases here legally, who no longer think it's even okay to go outside, who ask people to run errands for them because of the atmosphere that has been created in Washington, D.C. So it's definitely not safer for them.
Let me ask you a different question, which is...
Yeah. So, you seen that, you heard that. Okay, Pete Buttigieg trying to Democrat-splain, right? Because that's what it is. It's Democrat-splaining to a legal immigrant, a brown person, right? That, no, you're supposed to be afraid, right? You're supposed to live in fear because of Trump, right? And Pete Buttigieg was confused. He's like, why is this brown person not claiming that they're afraid, right? In fact, this brown person is actually saying the exact opposite of what I'm saying. This brown person is saying that he feels safer under Trump than he's ever felt, right? And you talk about Bush, Obama, Biden, right? He's saying, under Trump, I feel safer. Goes directly against his narrative. Again, the race narrative here from Pete Buttigieg. It's just funny how Democrats really believe that they speak for immigrants. They speak for so-called black and brown people, right? They speak for so-called minorities that, they can tell minorities how they're supposed to feel and how they're supposed to think about certain things. Again, it doesn't matter what skin color or race you are, but again, even if you're black or brown, if you're in this country legally, you don't have a damn thing to worry about, right? You don't have anything to worry about. You're not being deported. You're not being harassed. It's not happening. Now, that's not to say that there may not be a one-off, every now and then, okay, yeah, ICE might get the wrong person. ICE might, they might detain somebody who's a citizen, who's hanging around illegals, right? Or in the vicinity of illegals. Yeah, that might happen every now and then, but they're not being deported, okay? They're not being thrown in jail. Okay. Every policy, everything is going to have some one-off where you're going to have some extreme thing that happens. That's just a numbers game, right? That's just statistically how it goes. But that's not the actual rule. That's not happening to everybody. And it's not happening at the rate that Democrats claim, right? Not to the point where, again, if you are a so-called black or brown person, that you should be afraid of going outside, right? That you got to get people to run errands for you. No, the only people that feel that way or that should feel that way are people who are in the country illegally, right? It's really that simple. So I found that clip to be fascinating. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.